calling the Prime Minister. Please state your POI preference. OG, are you guys there? Please feel free to start the debate. Yeah.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, so if I lag out or suddenly sound robotic in the middle, please interrupt me so I can change my audio set. My Wi-Fi has been messy inside. So PI preference, just unmute. I'll probably take 5 minutes because I have lots of things to bring. She, her. Uh, to go running, all I say is for the purpose of the debate, and none of them represent my own opinions. And so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So let's start this debate with a few really important framing. First is, what does the e-sport industry looks like? Because I think we need to understand what the field actually looks like, right? We say that it is inherently misogynistic, the industry is, because it's an extremely male-dominated field where people continue to patronize on women who play the games because there is a bias that they are not as good, whereas there are a lot of rising female YouTubers and Twitch streamers who have shown again and again that they are good at it. For example, Lily Pichu being the CEO of Tekken during a game broadcast live of 200s and thousands of people in the game of Tekken. And also Valkyrie and also Pokemon. The opposition team might say that, well, they're only 1 in a million. First, that is a misconception because there are women out there who can play very well, but the problem is that they lack the exposure because there are platforms that are very mean or condescending towards them. So secondly, why on our side it's better? Because we directly challenge the current perspective and stereotypes that women can play by putting them in the same field, by putting them in this by putting them in the same playing field as men to prove that they are not behind. There's no clear psychological, biological, or even pathological proof that states that men are better than esports than men. So then opposition has to prove to us, why is it justified to put them in a separate league in the first place? Putting them into their separate category doesn't fix anything or change any perspective because it continues to prove that there is a distinction between men and women in the sports industry, that they need to be separated in the first place. Two simple arguments. First is the principle of exposure. Why do we oppose this as government? Because when we think about sports in general and the need to create a separate league for women to play it, runs on a few layers. First, that there is a biological difference. Two, that there is an audience that is willing to support them. Three, that it will lead to mass amount of exposure. And first is there is no biological there is a biological difference, but like I've stated to you, in terms of esport, there is no clear biological, pathological, or psychological difference that discriminates against women playing in the esports industry, because it's a game that's purely about skill and training, not something that has to do with how high you jump or how high you can serve or how strong you are to kill other people. Second is the audience. WNBA and women rugby thrive exactly because they are women and the league that is exclusive creates a space where men can't fully support. So women can fully support. I'm not saying that there is no woman going to support the women esports team, but the reality is that the scene is very male dominated. It doesn't help that there is a majority of misogynistic view against women in the gaming industry, which is why you don't see a lot of them in broad daylight. So supporting the existence of these female leagues end up pushing the stereotype on them and even further strengthening the bias or even the idea that women are not as good as men in esports because they have to be given an entirely separate league for them to play. The impact is that we can never truly compare their performance to male counterparts because they keep playing in their own league again and again. If the op teams say that they can do collab, we think that the manifestation of the amount of audience is still not going to be that big because the inherent male-dominated nature of the gaming industry. Why is it better on our side? Because now the women are given the chance to enter the male-dominated field while challenging them head on. The characteristic of the gaming industry is that they can't say no when the skill of the player speaks for themselves. So for them to be able to enter the league in the first place is a testament to their skill. Thirdly is the on the layer of manifestation of exposure. It manifests in two ways. First is through controversy and cognitive dissonance. when a woman enters the field, they are more likely to receive some level of backlash or just outright hate. Why is that okay and justifiable on our side of the house? Because that is the first barrier that we have to go through in order to prove that they do belong in the league or the field. Because like I said, skills are the ones that matter here. For them to enter the league, the first place shows that they are capable. Even men who play randomly on Valorant shut up when they find out that the player that has carried them the entire round is a woman. Regardless, a study shows, I did not Google this, I just remember, men who have lower skills are more likely to be discriminative against women because they feel threatened, while men who are better performing in the game are more likely to be kinder than women. This shows that it is more of a subconscious bias that they have. To break through it, we must show them that they are able to compete at the same level as men. This in turn creates public discussion that can be later leveraged for popularity of the team to get brand deals that support women, interviews to reach more people even outside of the gaming industry, etc. Second is the rally support of from all fans. There are a lot of people who watch sports even without playing it. To garner support, we need to be able to reach those who are outside of the gaming industry to cater them for them to support these women because they are women and they are in the male dominated field. And now the next question is that why would the gaming industry be interested in this? Because let's face it, any esports are still profit oriented, right? They thrive off of media exposure. They thrive off the idea that they want to be better, that there is some sort of unique selling point that they have. For example, like God, I forgot his name, but like they want to be unique. They want to gain exposure, and one of the ways that they can do it is they get a female player that is as good as the male players at the end of the day, even if they don't enter to play in the league, etc. And at the end, even if they are part of the team but not actively playing, it's still okay because the level of media exposure and this, like the one I said, the manifestation of exposure to controversy or rally support from all fans will still exist because when they see that there is a woman in the league, a male dominated and male centric industry, they are more likely to support because they feel like they can relate that, okay, I want to play Valorant because of her, because she shows me that women can also play with in the same playing field as men. I can get to that point too. And it shows that nothing shows that men are better at playing outside
Your first
outside just the percentage or the idea of the existence of or at least the idea that is more male dominated. Okay, yes, BOI.
Do you think that women have no
One,
inherent
two,
disadvantage
three.
against men in
Okay.
the
And so
esports?
the second point is why opposition's case would not run. Because first of all, they need to prove to us why women are going to get the full benefit of exposure, audience, and acknowledgement from the gaming industry on their side of the house. Because they need to explain to us why it will be manifest in such a way that it would get to the same benefit that we do. They need to explain to us why then the female gaming league will come onto the same level of the male league, where there is no clear justification why they have to be two different leagues in the first place. If they bring out the mechanisms of collaboration, the exposure still doesn't manifest that way, and they need to explain to us then why is it justified in the first place to put them in two separate leagues when there is no defining biological, pathological, or psychological features that shows that women are lesser or men are still better at esports at Valorant at CS:GO than they are with women. So you need to explain to us for them to be able to win this debate. But if they haven't explained to us that, I don't understand why they should win. So at the end of the day, even if there is a small percentage of women that is going to get into the industry either way, we think that it's better because the exposure towards women who are in the gaming industry and outside of the gaming industry is still better because now it shows that these women are going to be extra highlighted by the gaming industry, by the companies who want to actually use that sort of momentum to gain more profit, to gain more exposure, and there is going to pull in more people to watch the leagues, to have people buy more of the merch, and for that level of exposure that we get, that's not compared to whatever up is going to us they will get. So for that.
All right, thank you, OG. Before we continue, just making sure, was OG able to hear CO's POI or was there a connection issue? OG first speaker, were you able to hear CO's POI? Okay, it seems like there is some issue on OG part, yeah. OG second speaker, can you hear us? Can you hear me? FKH Anabel?
Yes, yes. Sorry.
Oh, okay, okay. Sip, sip. All right then. In that case, continuing with OO, calling the first speaker. Please state your POI pref, then start whenever you're ready.
You can just write the POI on the chat. Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, yep. Perfectly audible.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I believe that gender exclusive leagues and titles are important to promote women's participation and visibility in the professional esport. Why do people don't want to join the esport? Because it's a male dominated field, right? People don't want to join it not because there's a physical difference or anything, but people are afraid of facing discrimination and abuse, like maybe sexual harassment or just taunting from the male uh, audience or even the male competitors, right? So I think that even by creating a gender exclusive leagues and titles, it's not that we don't have an open competition where women and men can compete, but we also create an a choice for the women to compete within themselves to create a discrimination and abuse free environment, a safe space for women to be themselves and to enjoy the sport. For example, people don't, not only in esport, people tend to create women only spaces, like in the train, for example. There's a women only um, carriage where women can feel safe and go there by go places by themselves. And there's also a mixed space where women and men can exist within a space with each other, right? So mm, with this, they can create a safe space for women, so more women will be able to join the competition and feel safe. And the opening up government said that the exposure is the main thing, that people will notice the girls more if they compete with the men. But will it really? People will watch a girls only tournament more, I think, because for example, people love to watch female streamers because, for example, because they're more polite and there's no taunting, or it's just more chill in general. And my second point is that yes, there is no physical difference in between men and women in esport, but women and men are socially conditioned to act differently. Men are generally more loud and they tend to uh, speak more rashly than women. So that's what discourage people to. Oh, there's a POI. Okay.
Uh, yeah. How women can have safe space when you actually worsen the stigma towards women by segregating them, proving they cannot play with men.
Okay, so it's not that they cannot play with men, right? If they have if they want to compete with men, they can join the open competition. But this is only giving them another choice, where they can feel safe and competing. Yeah, uh, it's not that the stereotype that women cannot play with men, but it's that we women, we can also compete within them ourselves and feel safe about not having to deal with the sexual harassment. It's not that we're lesser than them, but we can feel safe and be ourselves without having to deal with the discrimination and abuse from the competitors. Okay, this This also creates an even playing field for us because, yeah, that's it for
All right, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. Calling Deputy Prime Minister. Again, please state your POI pref, then start whenever you're ready.
Okay, wait. I'm setting up my timer, but before that, I prefer my POIs through chat. So yes, even like the whole POI, just write it on chat. Wait, okay, starting my speech.
Sorry, just
in
reminding that the content of the POI are not allowed to be delivered through chat, yeah. So only the
Oh, okay.
either.
Okay, then
It's okay.
if I cannot hear it because of my internet, please bear with me. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Notice how the opposition's entire case is built on the premise that esports is a misogynistic and toxic environment for women from the get-go, right? But that is exactly why we say that the fact that misogyny will always continue to exist regardless on which side we're talking about here, it won't disappear just by you creating a whole new league. You are just postponing the confrontation of it. Now, before I start onto my argument, let me show you some rebuttals. So this is opposition's idea of gender exclusivity is that women need to be coddled and be safe from the harms of reality. But let's be real, the world is becoming even more progressive. If sexual harassment, there will be like if there are like sexual harassments in the game, then there will be reports because there are existing mechanisms in place like to support women everywhere, even in like workplace or women carriages, like you mentioned. Backlash is something that is normal. It exists even without women's exclusive spaces. And talking about safe space, progressivity doesn't come when you stay safe and don't challenge the existing stereotype. Because this is the way the waves of feminine work, because they kept challenging the SQ, and that is the same thing that we have to do. More on this on my argument later. But watching female streamers and watching female leagues is different because streamers have the liberty over their marketing, which like the female league doesn't have. And about socially conditioned, so now the justification to separate the leagues is because women are docile and men are more irrational and masculine. We don't get what they're trying to say. They can't win in this debate because they frame women as those who are need to be protected or whatever. And here's a way against CG. They can't win above us because we have explained to you that the level of exposure, audience, and progressivity only comes when we challenge the SQ. And the principal analysis have been brought in by OG. Now, onto my argument on how these like more like extension on why gender exclusive leagues are bringing more harm than good. Like my first speaker has already explained on why on a principle level this response of segregation is a failure anyway because it means that we are surrendering to the toxic status quo that validates the idea that the main competitive stage is for men. Why? One, by creating like a separate league for women instead of the gaming community like celebrating women who are able to break in like the most intense level of competitions, aka with both men and women, you are just creating a group of women who are just competing each other in a separate event that will receive far less attention, unlike they said. And I will talk more about that later. And speaking about attention, right, because remember that most of the time these separated leagues target the wrong audience anyway. Because the best case scenario is sure you will have girls who look up to like their female streamers, like watching these shows. But when these shows are lower quality, because usually the men's league are more popular, that means there's only like more sponsorship and more like organizations wanting to fund the leagues for the men. And here is actually why the men's league are more likely to be popular, unlike they said, because one, male players largely operate without the intense pressure to constantly like jaga image, because they have for example, they don't have to be always be pretty like we see on esports Indonesia, where women have to be super PR trained and like they have to always watch their diet, even though they're in esports community, not physical sports. This freedom that men has allows them to be more expressive and like unfiltered, and sometimes they can even be like to a toxic degree that but they are like perceived by the audience as more entertaining. Like we see this, for example, like we see on Twitch, there are like clip farming, like intense rage or like blunt comments, but then it will get posted on Instagram Reels and it will be like haha funny, and it becomes like this free marketing tactic for both that individual and for the male league. We see this in, like, for example, I Show Speed, right? But notice how there are like no women like this, because whenever women, like in general, they show the same intensity of emotion or like rage as the male counterparts I mentioned before, they will just be labeled as like unattractive, for example, and like it will just trigger even more sexist harassment. So how should we respond then if we cannot like segregate them, because it just brings more harm than good? We want to focus on reinforcing moderation more, right? We want to invest heavily in zero tolerance policies. For example, like we see there can be like hate speeches or maybe harassment on both for the live chats, like in the streams, or maybe even comments outside of the league by the audience, but also maybe in game, like by the players themselves. And especially now that you have this like broader audience in one league, like they are all watching in this one specific league, there are now women who can point out, for example, these misogynistic comments. Like we see so many like women calling out misogynistic comments on Twitter, for example, in comparison when there are mostly male audience in the male league. It's either A, they can still talk about women even if there are no women playing in that league, and now it's less likely for them to take accountability because, well, they are just surrounded by their fellow men who probably don't even know that they are being misogynistic, or just straight up they like don't care, right? Because, as always. Or B, even if there are men or like maybe a small portion of women who are watching those leagues who want to point out like any misogynistic comments, then they will be in a minority, right? Like especially if they're women, because if they bring it outside of the platform, for example, they want to call them out on Twitter, then they'll just get attacked by like the local Reddit bros, and then they have to be dogpiled into silence. And like the Twitter algorithm, if you are like tweeting as a woman in like an audience full of men, then like the Twitter will just give that like point out to those men anyway, so it will just not work. So lastly, what is our worst case here and why it still wins? We acknowledge that it is possible that we create like a high barrier, for example, for even talented women, because organization who, as my first speaker said, is as always profit oriented. They are too hesitant to sign up for these women because women are more prone to controversy, like I said before. But at least every single woman who are in these competitions are undeniably a refutation to the misogynistic SQ. She is competing like for the same titles in front of the same harsh audience, even harsher even. Her victory will also be a victory for true equality. The struggle will also be public, and with the audience's back, it will force the entire industry to confront the problem rather than hiding from it, which is why I proud to propose.
All right, thank you, DPM, for that speech. Calling second speaker of OO, please state your POI pref, then start whenever you feel like it.
Hello, am I audible?
Hello. Yes, you're audible.
My POI preference, you can say it in chat. I go by Deden, and one moment. We'll start speaking in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I believe that it is true that misogyny and toxicity in like esport will still exist regardless whether the leagues are separated by gender or not, and that I agree that having moderation would actually be the best to help to fight against those harassments. However, even if there are reports that comes from like women, or perhaps you could say like earlier that was mentioned through Twitter, mentioned about the misogynist comments or sexist comments, how will you actually ensure that the moderation actually go through and even enforce the punishment without having it to be brought online to the public first? How would the team like ensure if the league can like ensure that that never actually happens? I do think that women being able to participate with men would be nice. However, I still believe that having a gender league is still necessary because, as mentioned by my team before, that it helps create a safe space for a women, or rather a choice on what leagues they prefer to join in the esports. We know that women are more likely to get harassed when it comes to like online gaming, and that can also be translated to esports. And because of that, sometimes women are less likely to speak up because they are afraid of receiving those harassment. And I think being able to create a gendered space would help increase the interest of women within the game, or like feel more comfortable in gaming. But this does not mean that women and men are different in terms of skills of their game set. That's all for me.
All right, thank you, Deal, for the speech. Calling the member of GOF to open the closing half of the debate. Floor is yours. Please state your POI pref.
Check, I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible.
POI preference is for you to just put it in chat. I'll have the chat box open. Yeah, pronounce she, they. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 points of clarification before I get into my rebuttal. First on OG. I think that OG is true in the way they question the idea that we need to question the status quo and like challenge the ideas that already exist inside of the esports community on how males are going to be better at this game in general are something that we do need to do. But an exclusive argument that CG is going to forward to you is on how this integration actually provides benefits, such as like protection for female players, which is something opening failed to do. But we think that this is actually an important concern coming from opposition, because at the end of the day, women are harmed under these like esports communities, and we think that they do need a sort of protection. But we're going to explain to you how this can still exist when we actually integrate like women's sports under the general like league, right? But on OO, they say that women can choose whether they want to participate in the general or female league, and this is okay because if they want protection, then they can get it, for example, right? But I think that OO's case can only play if they prove to us the woman would still opt into general leagues on their side, because we think that it's harder because female leagues exist in the first place, right? Because of the fact that even if they were to still able, they were still and they even if they could still join these like main like general leagues in the first place, it's going to be harder because of the fact that they're still more likely for them to like be ridiculed because of the fact that they're the only woman among like a bunch of other men. But also they're just, even if they do get appreciated, they're more like, it's mainly going to be like 1 or 2 people that are just sort of like the token female players that people view as the one female player that can actually compete. This doesn't help other female esports players actually to the extent that it will on our side, and I'm going to prove that inside of my arguments. 2 things I'm going to talk about. First, on the stigma around women identifying players, and secondly, on the esports industry itself and how we can actually provide better protection for that. First, on the stigma, right? There's two reasons why we even want to integrate this in the first place, right? Firstly, because we want to show representation of women in communities that already exist. That's to say that when we actually see a lot of female players start to get recognition, that means that there's actually going to be more players that are female, and that can lead to a better like esports community where there are a lot more female players, and that means safer space for women in general. But secondly, to make others, aka men, also see that women can also play these games, and there's actually going to be better because of the fact that there's going to be like longer term acceptance and better community for women in the end, right? But why are women likely to be able to participate? I think firstly, it's true that a lot of women already exist under these games. There are a lot of good players. We already see this from like Twitch streamers. We already see it from like a lot of like female players playing already in leagues in the current status quo, right? But the thing is that they lack a lot of exposure and they don't actually have enough recognition, right? But the thing is, we have to notice that it already is starting to happen. It's not like in every single league we can only see that men are the ones that are playing inside these leagues, because we can start to see a rise, especially recently with like with the fact that there are a lot of women that are starting to like actually join these leagues in the first place, meaning that it is possible to happen and the integration can still happen on our side. But also, we think that when this segregation happens, or when we actually we actually differentiate between these female leagues and these female titles in the first place, this means that at the end of the day, when these female players or these new players, for example, want to even start practicing to get good at these sports or want to actually like get into these games, they still need to play with men in the end when they're actually practicing and things, right? This means that because of the fact that this stigma still exists inside of their side, this means that not that many people are going to be pushed to do so just because they admire like a couple of players on the female like leagues. It does not mean that they're going to feel safe enough to be able to play amongst men when they're generally playing on their everyday life, right? I mean that people are not going to opt into it on their side. But also, I think that on the comparative here, on when we actually let women seep in, there's going to be in the rise in the idea that women are just as capable in esports, and this is going to be bring more interest because of the fact that there are going to be more women headlining, and like actually gaining this attraction that they need to be able to like encourage more female players and create these safer spaces, right? But secondly, I'm going to talk about the esports industry, which is actually going to link into like the protection of women in esports, because I think that a lot of the time these kind of things, if they cannot come from the community itself due to the male domination, that it has to come from the industry itself, and we're going to prove how this incentive is going to exist on our side, right? I think there's two very simple things that esports industry want. They want more players and more profit, but secondly, they also want a good, decent image at the end of the day, because obviously they're a company and they do not want people to like call them like a misogynistic company, right? But what happens under female leagues and under female leagues on upside opposition? I think one, they're more likely to get underfunded due to the fact that the general league still exists and they give more profit towards the esports industry. But secondly, there's just less exposure because no one is really that interested in female leagues as they are with the general league, right? Even if there is a certain amount of interest, it's never going to be as big as the general leagues where the most competitive players are playing, because of the fact that there is also the stigma and like the idea that women are not as good, meaning that people are just less likely to opt into watching it in the end, right? But when we separate, when there are women who can compete with the general league, they're more likely to not be able to join this general league in the first place, right? Due to the fact that there is going to be surrounding stigma around them as women. And this stigma is never going to go away when we actually put this separation happening in the first place, right? But what's the impact here then? If women are able to integrate, that means three things, right? Firstly, there's going to be better exposure. That means that the exposure that they get, since there is going to be a big amount of people watching it, or the big amount of like people like opting into it, then that means that the female players who do make it or who do like actually win in the general league, for example, they're more likely to get a good decent amount of exposure. But it also means that there's just going to be better funding and support, right? This is important. Since this is the esports industry biggest source of income, right? That when they actually get more female players, for example, and they see that there's going to be attraction coming from female players to the fact that there are like famous female players now, that means there's going to be more funding and support also for the female players, and also coming from the esports industry themselves. But also, when we integrate, we force people like the management, the investors, and the organizers of these competitions and these tournaments to actually invest directly in these sort of inclusivity and accessibility in the first place, because you see a lot of female players start to rise, for example, and you see that they do still face a certain amount of discrimination, even despite the fact that they are really, really good players. And then that means that there's more likely going to be conversations about the misogynistic tendencies of these esports industry and the misogynic tendencies of the players themselves, and these things are more likely to give a burden for the esports industry to solve, or like for them to actually help invest and actually help protect these women in the first place, right? What this looks like, it is because of the fact that there's going to be like maybe female players that talk about the discrimination that they face when they are playing, for example, then that means that these esports industries that want to like take care of their image are of course going to opt into like helping. For example, they would do like more like they would have like equity teams or people who are like actually going to help with anti-harassment policies among the game, and there's actually going to be more better like guidelines according to that, or there's maybe even like mentorship programs that come that actually will provide this sort of protection and safety towards these women under when they are actually going to be playing under these games, right? And that means the safety and protection that UP is actually going to be UP is so worried about will exist on our side when these women can actually rise by being integrated inside of the esports industry themselves, rather than just being separated and never considered by the community, and never changing the mindset of the community in itself. Rather propose.
All right, thank you, member of GOF. Calling member of UP to open CO's case.
All right, testing. Am I audible?
A little bit teeny tiny.
Okay. Is it clearer now?
Oh, better.
All right. Thank you. POI, you can go through. Yeah, you can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself. It's fine. Hold on, setting my timer. Okay. Summer speech in 3, 2, 1. Before going into my case, just talk very quickly about the 3 other teams and going to my framing, right? So firstly, let's talk about OG a little bit. I think it's quite confusing on who they want to defend. We know that obviously the vulnerable actor is women, and this is why we need to defend them, and this is why we need to protect them. So I don't understand why then suddenly in OG side they don't want to protect women as the vulnerable actor, as the one that has been so oppressed and so criticized by the entire society in itself, right? But also, OG also never gives any reason why the benefit that will exist in their side will outweigh all of the exact harm, all of the harassment that existed within the community of like esports at the end of the day, right? But Odin, I think Odin never really contextualized anything. So that's what CEO would bring the contextualizations of what exactly is the gender exclusive league in esports in itself and how then it will impact women. But a quick question to both CG and Uji. Why do women need to prove themselves to men? Because at the end of the day, every single thing that both government bench brings is very contingent that the people inside of the esports industry, which is the fans, the other team players, for example, or even the committee, will respect women. In our side of the house in CEO, at the very least, we were able to provide a safe space that every single woman players and teams are able to fall into if they are unable to compete to the open stage, for example, or if they're not comfortable in the open stage. And that is exclusive coming from CEO, right? 3 points of framing before going into my case. Firstly, just because this exists the exclusive space doesn't mean that there is no team or no women's only team that are going to join the open competitions or or the competition that exists between that have women teams as well, right? It's the same thing, the same logic with there's IWGM and there's also another debate competitions, or it just for example every single specific gender exclusive leagues existed. It's not because meaning that women cannot go into like any other type of leagues. It's again, sure, OG already said that it's choice, but we'll further talk about why these choices do matter, right? But this is also able to tackle down the entire case of OG because OG's claim is just about that women can't play anymore in the open league, and that's why it's important, right? So that assumption has already been proven wrong. But B, to note, we do agree that women are not bad at all at video games, and obviously to an extent they're also able to compete against the men. But why then the exclusive space is basically needed is because women is inherently at an insane amount of disadvantage. I.e., men when they are young, for example, when they're boys, they're playing esports since a young age is seen as well, that's a good thing. They have talents and etc. If girls do that, they'll be asked to help with chores. They'll be asked that their dreams basis. They'll be asked that it's too boyish. They should stop, right? So their dreams are crushed at a very young age. So this gender exclusive leagues impact is way larger at scale, right? For example, sure, young girls or even parents of young girls, they're able to see that the women are able to excel in a safe environment. Because if you ever go see a CS:GO lobby, for example, it will radicalize you to the point that you will hate all men because the insane amount of hatred that they have towards women. So having a safe space created for women is to be able to nurture the young girls that see that they also have talent, that they also want to play in the esports, for example, right? And this is why exactly women should be protected. And the only way for them to be protected is for them to have to fall back into safe space. If they want to play in an open competition, we also encourage that, right? We just want them to have space for them to fall back into. But lastly, how does sport league actually look like, right? Mostly it's going to be international league, but before that we have qualifiers in regional area, for example, Asia, North America, and etc. And these mostly are teams-based esports, right? So either you have like co-ed, which mostly still consists probably going to have like one woman only in each co-ed teams, or you have like team-based on on their sex, or the women's team, for example, or the all men's team, and etc. Right? So going into my case on CEO, why then the gender exclusive league is important, and how does it actually look like? A, we think that the existence of this specific league means two things. Firstly, there's demand that existed within the people or within the fans or even within the society itself that wants to see the female teams compete with one another. But second, there's a good amount of women that exist in the status quo that needs a space for them to be able to grow as well as players to be able to compete in the highest level. Obviously, it means obviously this costs a lot of money, right? So sponsors will still do exist and able to sustain the league in itself or able to get a lot of like high amount of prices like $50,000 for example for the winning team of Valorant women's only league, right? So I don't understand why then suddenly in government side of the house they say that there is no one that will watch, the league will fail in itself. Even the existence, even the idea in itself that is created later, meaning that there is already certain demand and status quo, but it's also needed for the safe space for this woman, because at the end of the day, the misogynism inside of the industry would not fail or will not change just because you're going to create some sort of committee inside of inside of the open league, or you have like one or women's only team in the league, right? Sure, POI. Three.
Okay, so I understand what CEO is saying when safe space push people into underfunding, no progressivity, and furthering stereotypes. Segueing into major league is a half stance, and we're talking one or the other. You can't call both. Your mechanism still doesn't explain why they're not playing at the same field as women as you want it with the progressivity.
Sure, even if women's only play in the women's only league, I will later prove then why it's still better for them anyway. But B, I think sport league is obviously not easy. It's a battle of mentality, for example, for them to be able to perform at the very high end of their own levels, right? So for women's team, notice that the insane amount of pressure that women's team having, right? It's because it's not about their team in itself. It's not because they represent, for example, RRQ, but it represents the entire women's race, because something that's often do by the majority of the people, right? If these women teams fail, it's not because they lack the skill, it's because they're women and they cannot play video games. That is something that government need to prove why it will not happen, why they're going to be, all fight identity, which is obviously not, because the hecklers, the pressure, or even the death threats that happen into the women's teams DMs, for example, or even the comments on the live stream will obviously put insane amount of harms in their mentality, and will also impact their performance. This is why a lot of women's team only cannot go proceed the qualifiers, because the insane amount of hatred that existed that will mess their headspace, and at the end of the day their growth will stop only there, right? So going to see them, this is the argument, even if women's only play in the women's only league, it's still fine, because growth can only happen within the existence of this exclusive league. Why? Firstly, safe space, and it's very important. But why exactly it's important, right? Something that OO never explained. Because you have the less pressure and less burden to be able to prove yourself, to be able to compete yourself, to be able to say that, oh, I play as good as men. Because you don't have to, right? I don't understand why women need to be able to prove that they're playing as good as men. You just need to play as good as you can. That is the entire the entire aspect of playing video games in itself. When you have less passion and burden imposed by externalities, you're able to play into your fields, you're able to grow. But aside from that, you're also able to gain the sense of camaraderie with other with other women's only team, because media, sure, the media will pit these women's teams against each other, for example, or say that the women are weak and etc. But at least in our side of the house, having the women's exclusive only teams, the players inside of the teams are able to see that this is what is the environment that they want to be. This is why at the end of the day IWGM existed, is because you want to have this sense of friendship and bond between one debaters to another. Same logic applies. Proud to propose. Oppose.
All right. Thank you, member of up. Calling member, sorry, government whip to close the bench case.
Okay, just check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Pernan today, your preference just directly unmute yourself. Starting. Wait. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason why women are hard to enter the open leagues is because they are normalized to play in low teams and low games because there is no exposure and no representation for women in open leagues to begin with, right? I think that this is worsened under opposition because you want to create a segregated place for women where they will not have the opportunities to play in the open leagues even more because it's different and it shows that they are indeed incapable of playing in the open leagues. This is why stigmatization will be so much worse under your side because you don't want these women to actually have a place in the open leagues, and this is how you create further stereotypes of sexism, and women will even have harder time to be accepted in the community because you can only compete against women, right? Two reasons why this is urgent. Firstly, this is backlashing with the goal of wanting to create a safe space for women because you are proving even more that women don't deserve any space in the open leagues and the opportunities to actually thrive and have better teams and have better sponsorship, right? This is something that the whole bench of opposition has never answered because why is it justified to take away all of these opportunities for women? But moreover, this is urgent because this is the most contributing context to the debate and why this is the only thing that should matter because creating safe space is only able to happen if you make sure inclusivity happens, and that is why only CG is the only team that proved these panels. But secondly, I think that this will not give more exposure for women because their leagues are not as high marketed as the open leagues. Therefore, it's not as sexy with the open leagues that get more streams and more media coverage and sponsorship that heavily relies around the market. And most of the time, were also enjoyed by women, right? This is urgent because this motion heavily revolves around the context of esport industries and how they actually operate, and this is something that opposition never proved as to why women leagues will be something that is attractive on your side when it doesn't have that much market, when it doesn't have that much streams and sponsors to begin with, right? This is why my members extension is very important panels, and this is something that the opposition side never responded to begin with, right? What it has proved to you and how it contributes to the debate. Then firstly, we have proved to you why this will worsen the whole stereotype and stigma against women because of the exclusive leagues and plays in the esports, and this is how you worsen the stigma against them because you think that they are incapable of playing or having equal and better strategy than men, and this is what contributes to more stigma at the end, right? This alone contributes the most to the debate because we have proved to you why the entire opposition case is going against the urgency of actually wanting to prove that women are also able to play in the open leagues, right? The only way people can see this if you see directly women play with the top teams against men and other top players, not these panels. This is only exclusively explained in CG, right? But secondly, we have proved to you how we can have better investment and sponsorship and the whole esport industry that will invest more inclusively and create better accessibility and more protection for women. This is our most exclusive case in this debate, and it contributes more because we actually prove an alternative to create an inclusive and safe space for women, right? Not these panels. This is more effective way against exclusive leagues because you give them the opportunities to actually get more exposure and expose within the open leagues and top teams, right? But firstly, then let's compare our side with all the three teams in this debate. Firstly, why are we above OG? One, we prove to you better as to how harmful it is actually for women and how we can create better exposure for young women in seizure, right? OJ was only able to explain to you the justification as to why this is bad, but we are the one that explained to you as to why we can get more exposure at the end of the day, right? But secondly, we proved to you why this is more urgent by investing on anti-harassment protection for women and how it is possible to get more investments and sponsorship because this organization and sponsorship are only wanting to invest on open leagues, right? By creating this alternative and want to create more anti-protection regulation, for example, they are directly investing on more inclusivity because they are forced to invest on open leagues because they are forced to invest on all of these protections because open leagues are the high marketed streaming league in this esport industry, right? But thirdly, I think that we tackled better the whole opposition case better because we answered their concern about how the industry can actually help women, but moreover, we proved to you better on technicalities as to why women leagues exist on the end of the spectrum and will less likely get attention like the open leagues. But let's move to opposition bench then. Let's firstly to OO. When they talk about creating safe space for women because there will be no abuse from men because they are harsh and etc. few responses to this. I think that this is wrong because the reason why men are so harsh is because they have this pre-existing opinion that women should not play esport games and that it's only for men because they never actually play with them and see that they are also capable with the skills and strategy and they are no different because it's esports and it depends on your strategy, reflexes and thinking in playing these games and the way integrating them in the team and community that you can actually see that they also deserve to go in open leagues, right? But B then, I think that you are actually supporting more harsh comment towards women because you create safe space, but at what cost, right? Because the community will still have hard time accepting you and you still have hard time getting exposure and sponsorship and media coverage for women leagues. This is something that you need to prove as to why they have equal why they will have equal opportunities for women, right? Even though on the base case that women leagues exist on your side and you provide safe space for women, but at what cost, right? Because they will still be demonized and compared to the general or open leagues because it was still seen as something that is unnecessary and it's something not as good as the open leagues because they are not as good. For example, the only way we can tackle this is that in CG we want to integrate them by creating more protection for women, for anti-harassment policies and all of that, making sure they can also have opportunities to play in the open leagues, right? But lastly then, why are we above CO panels? I think that firstly, the whole case is only derivative to OO, but secondly, when they talk about the whole idea that women have choices, right? I think that choices is irrelevant because even when you want to join open leagues, there will still be a barrier because you will be pushed to join women leagues because it's seen as unnecessary to play in the open leagues because again, there are pre-existing stigma towards women, right? But I think that when they talk about safe space for mentality, it's something that is actually irrelevant because what mentality that you play when you don't actually have the opportunities to even get stream and even get sponsorship and actually get the opportunities to prove that you can also play better or like equally than men, right? But lastly then, I think that we're above OCO because they failed to prove the urgency as to why this is very needed. Because even when they talk about camaraderie, this is something that's even better under or of the house because having other women in open leagues create better representation and more exposure to young women out there that you can also play, that you can also deserve these types of opportunities. Under all those reasons, CG wins this debate.
Thank you, GovWhip. To close the entire debate, I call upon UpWhip.
Okay, checking if I'm audible.
Audible and visible.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, sorry, wait. Let me restart. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We are not banning women from open leagues, so please do not buy all of the government teams' ideas that we are taking opportunities away from women. We're not. They can literally just join if they want to. I don't understand why we're taking away opportunities. But one question I want to ask both government teams: can you ensure that women can win in the open leagues? Because if their entire case is on stigma, on how it is important to erase the idea that women are bad at video games, that means the prerequisite of all these gamer dude bros are going to erase their misogynistic idea that women should be in the kitchen and not playing Valorant is if there's going to be an influx of women winning in open leagues, therefore disapproving all of these gamer dude bros initial thoughts. That is the prerequisite of this stigma being able to disappear. Because this is, and we think that they never really prove why suddenly there's going to be a lot of women joining and winning. So we think that all of government case already false. But also, one, we already tell you that women are general, are deterred from participation because the problem that exists of like this, the problem that exists in terms of sexism in the esports industry is structural. Even when you're not playing in a league, for example, it's just you playing in a random Valorant or league lobbies, you're still going to experience misogyny because like the moment you open your mic, probably the people, the men in your team are gonna suddenly spout out random sexist ideals and tell you that you deserve to be in the kitchen instead of playing Valorant. And I don't think this is something that is changed under their side. So I don't understand why women, even when they're playing for leisure and for fun, they're already getting all of these misogynistic remarks. Why they're suddenly going to have the incentive to join open leagues under their side? I don't understand how that's going to exist. But secondly, I think even in the best case scenario that sure, women will suddenly participate, this still doesn't guarantee that the stigma will suddenly disappear. Even in our current world where women are starting to breach male-dominated field, people are still misogynistic and undermine the value of women professionals. This is why the gender pay gap still exists. So just because women are now going have the ability to participate in open leagues, which is still inexclusive by the way, I don't understand why the stigma will suddenly disappear. Both of government teams never really proved this. This is why CG's idea on like how women will how the impact under our side is very small, because women are not going to opt into open leagues, because open leagues, for example, because even in the best case that they're just going to be tokenistic female representation. This is not exclusive. I don't understand why the representation is not going to be also tokenistic under your side, because they never really prove why suddenly there's going to be a significant increase in women participation. But when they talk about how women leagues get underfunded, on how there's less exposure because no one is that interested, I think I also have several responses. Is that first, gender exclusive leagues is quite literally the status quo. The fact that they still exist and they're still going on and running, meaning that probably the funding is still enough under our side. But even if the funding is not as big as the open league, I don't necessarily see why that's problematic, because they never really extend the harm of why gender exclusive league getting less funding is something that is to be considered in this debate. But even if sure that there's less exposure, but we think that all teams can see that the majority of the audience of open league watchers are men. So why is it that getting the validation of the gamer dude bros are important? I think there are lots of missing links that are coming from both government side. But I'm going to respond to OG next, because the basis of OG's argument and how there's no inherent differences between men and women, which leads to no urgency, in which the basis of this argument is basically saying that women do not have a significant disadvantage against men in esports, and that's why we shouldn't create a gender exclusive space. But the thing is, this is false. Even when there's no biological or pathological trait that decreases and inherently differs men and women from playing esports, women still have a significant disadvantage. And to say that they don't is just dismissive to the status quo. Why? For several reasons. First, it's in terms of exposure, because we already concede that the most of the fans of esports are men and misogynistic. It tells you that if you're a man, probably the chances of you getting more fans under your side is significantly higher in the open league. And women, even if they are good and have male fans, it's likely that they're just victims of objectification, and men don't watch them for their skills, but also only because of how they look. This is what happens to a lot of female streamers and a lot of female gamers. But how do I crystallize this harm even further? I want to tell you that in the sports industry, exposure is everything, because exposure leads to sponsors for funding to sustain not only livelihood but also for you to be able to improve, because exposure means appreciation, and it's difficult to get motivation if you don't have a good enough appreciation for you to be able to be motivated to continue and improve. But why good quality exposure cannot be achieved by women under government side? Because of the predominant male audience that inherently favors male players. So when there's a co-ed Valorant on League or whatever other team that wins a very prestigious esports league, I think at the end of the day, most of the exposure is going to go to their male counterparts anyways, and the female players are just going to get overshadowed. And even if women get attention, it's likely that it's not because of their skills, but more because they're just going to be conventionally attractive, and that's why the men and the fans pay attention to them. But what is the impact then? Is that it is very difficult for women to perform well, because they don't feel like they're going to be appreciated even if they perform better than their male counterparts, because there's a significant reduce in motivation and also less funding to receive training and overall incentive for skill improvement. This is why women are at a disadvantage in terms of performance, but also B, that women eventually in the esports industry are forced to succumb to the male gaze, because they see now that how if men is not going to appreciate them for like how they play, that the very least they can do is on selling their looks, which just leads to further objectification of women. We see this happening to lots of female streamers, right? But why is good quality exposure solved under our side? Because there's inherent market segmentation now, because there's a whole new league where the predominant watchers are women, or at least allies to women who actually care about women players that's beyond just their looks. This leads to impact is that they can get exposure, because at least in this very segmented league, they don't have to compete for attention against their male counterparts, and this is exactly the prerequisite of how they can perform better when they want to compete in the open league, because now they can get more sponsors that come from the women-only leagues, and they feel appreciated, and even if they feel underappreciated in the open leagues, at the very least that they have another safe space which they can feel like actually pursuing this field of like sports is something that is worth it. But also B, as that women can feel safe in the sense that when someone appreciates them in this gender exclusive league, it will purely be because of their skill, because they're human, and not only because they are are pretty and they don't have to appease to the male audience. But at the end of the day, even if you don't buy all of that exposure argument, sports is just a battle of it's not just a battle of strategy, it's a battle of mentality. Just having a good skills enough, just having good skills is not enough. You need to also be able to persevere in high stakes. The problem with esports is that women have difficulties in performing well because they're held to a higher standards. They know when they lose, they're not only sacrificing or like at the cost of their own image, but also at the cost of the entire female and women reputation in terms of video games. This is why they have faced certain very marginal difficulties when it comes to performance, and the government is just being dismissive of the status quo. Very proud SEO.
All right, thank you, CEO, for that speech. Let me stop sharing. Let me stop recording.